This is an essay I've actually had kind of like brewing for a while. The working title is called Las Diablitas, or How I Became an Adult. Someone once told me to stay as young as you can for as long as you can. I took that to heart, and for over a decade have tried to violently shove away the idea of growing up. I didn't really own anything except my car, and certainly not a house or land or stock. But since many friends had long since acquired spouses, infants, and business suits, some days I did think, marriage, kids? Other days, it's for once can I just have one income stream as opposed to barely scraping the rent up on 3 jobs. Fortunately, the return to grad school and the chosen life of a writer has effectively lowered my standards. And if I make it through a day with a good meal and something to laugh at, I consider myself blessed. But I made the mistake of taking myself out of my element a few summers ago when I volunteered to chaperone a group of 7th and 8th grade girls on a trip to Latin America. 1. Fuck fucking teenagers, fuck them. You cannot make teenagers sensible. You cannot bestow sense upon them. You couldn't give them sense if you beat them with a sense stick or force-fed them sense by the handful until they almost choke, until drops of sense run down their throats like tears. When I was a teenager, I might have thought adults were jealous of my youth, but now I know that's not it at all. Teens remind you that even as an adult, even in all your wisdom, you are essentially powerless to make another human being possess sense, use sense, or even desire a shred of sense. At 31, I still considered myself young. When I decided to venture to Antigua, Guatemala, I thought my apparent youth and coolness would make my authority more accessible. Surely my 3 8th graders, Dahlia, Brittany, and Emily, their names are changed to protect their parents, would see it this way. This was true for about 2 days, each of which was like a 24-hour slumber party, me running around on 14-year-old hyperdrive like a complete, for lack of a better word, sucker. On the 3rd day, I admitted to myself that I didn't love these girls. In reality, I wanted to push one of them in front of a bus. I realized that, in fact, I hated them, and realized why my parents must have hated me. Not only did I go to Antigua not knowing Spanish, but oblivious to the fact I only spoke an archaic strain of teenager. MTV and VH1 weren't enough. Not having kids of my own was not enough. The situation was that, although the girls and I all wore the same flare denim jeans and in some cases bra size, I was indeed an adult. 2. Answering questions about sex will not make you cool, not really. Before it came to my attention that I wanted the 3 girls dead, we did actually have a heart-to-heart type talk. It began one night when the girls were particularly giddy, pumped up on July heat and the excitement of being 2,000 miles away from home. The giggling and gossip escalated to a fevered pitch with the sweeping gestures and amplified facial of each OMG. The trio of them had become a frenzy of noise and limbs and hair, not unlike the turning of werewolves in the latest installment of Twilight. How fitting it was then when Emily threw herself on her bed and, much like the aforementioned Wolfman, had begun faux convulsing and writhing like the possessed. "What are you doing?" I asked her. She and the other girls told me that one of their classmates and her mother had recently gone on a trip to Disneyland and had heard a couple copulating in the adjacent hotel room. "I'm just trying to figure out how they made the bed speak," squealed Emily. She resumed convulsing. I sighed and announced, "As someone who has sex fairly regularly, I can tell you now it's not like that." And so there it was. I had uttered the word sex with such poise, without flinching or discomfort or fear. The girls' eyes widened, and with Emily and Brittany still in braces, and Dahlia and her retainer, they began to bombard me with question after question, each one laced with a pronounced orthodontic lisp. "Where's the clitoris?" screamed one. "Isn't it in your vagina?" offered another. I gasped. Sad, sad, sad. "Yeah, isn't that why guys try to go deep, because they're trying to hit it?" This came from Emily, who seemed to know the most but was grossly misinformed. I urged the resist to mutter, "That certainly seems what some of them think that," and instead asked, I know, I totally got that wrong, but I just caught up in the moment. It was actually supposed to go. I resisted the urge to mutter, "Well, some guys certainly seem to think that," and instead asked, "Look, how can you guys not know this? Didn't you get sex ed, and aren't you doing that thing with the hand mirror?" I know, right? They had, but alas, the instructions on what to do with the mirror had been lacking. Most grown women had had the clitoral location down for so long we couldn't remember not knowing it. I immediately thought, you know, as a girl I never got this info. Not like this. Now, this was the important shit. These were the details that counted. Sex ed as practical application. I've often said, wow, if I'd gotten a vibrator when I was 16, I might have gone to Harvard. As a chaperone, I decided cluing them in could only be considered a gift. With that, I took a pen and paper, I drew a slapdash vulva, an arrow, and an X. There, I said, pointing. They gathered around me in awe, almost a slight pause of reverence. Is it like a dot? Dahlia said. No was the right answer, but there were still too many questions. Plus, it was too late. The adolescents had come upon me, like zombies searching for brains. Their hunger for knowledge was focused and unrelenting. Do orgasms feel good? Aren't penises too big? You know that episode of Friends where Monica and Rachel are talking about the 7 erogenous zones? Like, what are they? For a while, I went into a clinical spiel about how the adult vagina can, in fact, accommodate, and I realized I hate that word, adult erect penises, babies' heads, not to mention balloons of heroin and other unmentionables. This led me to some vague articulations and still more diagrams. Like a fool, I even tried to find the 7 erogenous zones, uncertain whether I should count each breast separately. Soon, trying to compress the vast wisdom of decades of womanhood into a single evening became too much. I felt myself sinking under its weight. My good deed had gone awry. And damn it, these weren't even my kids. Luckily, once I started to delve into the standard speech about birth control and safe sex, their eyes began to glaze over, and I, waxing desperate for the company of grown-ups and a cold beer, eyed the door for my escape. More happened, but you know, just a lot. So this is, next piece is really short. It's from the novel that Michelle mentioned. And the only thing you really need to know is that it's about women in the future who get superpowers. Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's kind of cool, right? Which is the power of self-transformation. So they're shapeshifters. They can take the form of another person. And with that kind of tissue management, they can self-heal. So they get a cut and they can recover. They can heal themselves, which is kind of cool. And the only thing you really need to know as far as characters is Camille's the protagonist. Her partner is Geneva. And when they say the change, they refer to not menopause, but actually the time their power comes into itself. So when their powers emerge, it's called the change. And this is the moment when Camille actually realizes the extent of her self-healing. The bruises used to be the worst. Camille's father was usually smart enough not to leave a mark, but once in a while he forgot. He became careless. She would notice them in the shower, dark patches rising out of her skin, phantoms of violet and green. One on her forearm, the soft flesh below her bicep, the outer length of her thigh. They never hurt at first. She only felt them after their discovery, at which they suddenly seemed tender and malleable, as if parts of her were turning into clay or mud. After the change, after she could rule her form with the flutter of a thought, Camille noticed that she barely noticed bruises anymore. Both she and Geneva had been in their share of scuffles, fallen during night chases, taken a kick or a punch to various parts more than once. The pain was the same, but now the marks were barely an afterthought. In the shower, Camille could watch them fade, just like she'd seen elapsed time quicken on TV nature shows, the sped-up footage of snow melting, a flower blooming, an egg hatching open. She knew time healed all wounds, but as a shifter, she no longer needed so much of it. It was even better with cuts. Once, Camille got a gash on her side just below the ribs. She had been alone, the shock of the fight still fresh and pulsating, the wail of the ambulance still so far and faint it seemed imagined. When she was training, the rule was, if you're in a fight, you're probably going to get hit. Camille hated that truth, as simple and straight as a punch in the face. Her hand reached across to cup the curve in her waist, already plastered in blood and fabric. She looked down and gazed at her brilliant flesh, red and open like a mouth. Jesus, she said, and immediately tried to push the parts back together, rivulets trailing from each corner of the almond-shaped slice and finding their way beneath fingernails and into lines of skin. And just as she sucked air through her teeth to help ease the sting, Camille noticed the breach in her side growing smaller. The tissue seemed to rise up to meet itself, strands of muscle knitting with each other, platelets of blood gathering in a dance, her wounds healing themselves.